Attention, everybody. Just in case it wasn't said on this upcoming classic episode of Crime Time, the views and opinions expressed on the show are not necessarily those of Axe Ministry, Axe Media Group, and or their affiliate and subordinate ministries and or nonprofits. I just want to let you know that some of this content may be adult in nature, so please use discretion while watching with your children. So thanks for tuning in to this classic episode of Crime Time with Dr. Steve Albrecht. Attention, everybody. The views and opinions expressed on the show are not necessarily those of Axe Ministry, Axe Media Group, and or their affiliate and subordinate ministries and or nonprofits. It's that time again, folks. We're going to be talking about a bunch of cool stuff today and talking to a cool guy. Crime Time with Steve Albrecht. Take it away.
Thanks, Producer Matt. Thanks, Producer Jay. Welcome to Crime Time. This is Crime Time Podcast Episode 61. I'm Dr. Steve Albrecht, joining you from the Axe Media Group studios in Springfield, Missouri. For this hour, I'll be talking with Carl Hershman, a good friend of mine who retired after 32 years with the San Diego Police Department. Carl is a noted detective, a noted trainer, and a nationally recognized speaker. He's trained thousands of law enforcement professionals, prosecutors, military personnel, sexual assault nurses, examiners, and advocates for victims. He served as an instructor at the San Diego Regional Law Enforcement Academy on sex crimes investigations, interviewing and interrogation and investigations 101. He's worked in several assignments as an investigator for the PD in San Diego, Special Investigations Unit, Homicide, Sex Crimes, Elder Abuse, and the Catch Team, which is a cyber unit. Detective Hershman is on the training faculty for the Institute of Criminal Investigations, a government training agency, and is a member of the End Violence Against Women International Cadre of Experts. And we'll talk about EVAWA in our conversation. He's also a lifetime member of the California Sexual Assault Investigators Association, as testified, and he does a lot of expert witness work as an expert in sex crimes investigation, false reporting, which we'll talk about, and victimology of a sex crimes survivor. He also presents at San Diego area high schools, colleges, and universities on the subject of acquaintance rape and sexual assault by intoxication. Detective Hershman operates a consulting business in San Diego, advising and training law enforcement agencies across the country in sexual assault investigations. In 2007, Detective Hershman implemented, that's a hard word to say at this hour, the Sex Crimes Cold Case Unit in San Diego. During his 10 years in the Sex Crime Unit, he investigated more than 1,300 sexual assault cases. So we'll talk to my friend Carl about everything we need to know to keep our families, our loved ones, the women in our lives safe from sexual assault. So thanks for listening to Crime Time, where we talk about crime and crooks and cops and personal security. We talk about some dangerous people and lots of heroes. We even mentioned a few stupid crooks, and most importantly, I'll talk to you about what you can do to keep yourself and your family safe from crime and violence. As always, you need to be vigilant at home, in your neighborhood, in your community, at school, at work, and even on the road. This show exists to make you feel more empowered, more secure, and more educated on security issues and the criminal justice system. As background, I worked for the San Diego Police Department for 15 years, first as a patrol officer, then a reserve sergeant, and a domestic violence investigator. I now work as a training consultant and teach training workshops focusing on HR, employee coaching, workplace violence, and security in the workplace. I've written 24 books on business, workplace violence prevention, police subjects, and guns. You can find all of my books on Amazon Kindle. You can always reach me at my website, crimetimeradio.com. Send me an email. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Steve Albrecht. You can find past episodes of the show on SoundCloud, and we always run this show live on YouTube and Facebook every Tuesday at this time. So good morning, Carl.
Good morning.
And when I look at your background, I think of the cases that you have handled, and I know some people in my life that you know, and the cops that I have met around the country that work in sexual assault and sex crimes. Just the concern I have for the cases and the emotionality of these things, and I mean, did you ever get so weary of the type of work that you do, where you say, how can people do this to other human beings? And it's like working in child abuse, where you say, how could somebody do this to a child? And you say, how could somebody do this to a man or a woman in terms of a sexual assault? And it's a different vibe in working in sex crimes. It's, they're living, as you know from your work, they're living homicide victims, really, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's why I stayed in the unit for so long. My plan was to go into the unit, be there maybe 3 years and move on. And what I saw, very disturbing cases that I did work, I felt that obviously my plan changed. I stayed there for 10 years, and I just thought with my investigative skills and my passion, I would read these cases, I'd get them and investigate them, and then I would, really connect with the victims, and that could be, the victims were from all walks of life. When I was in patrol, you think you see everything, and you worked patrol. And when I got to the sex crimes unit, I was just pretty shocked. And also, I was concerned about the investigations, into these cases and how hard they were. And sometimes, a lot of times, detectives would come into the unit and just get so burnt out. And, you have this hard shell anyway after working patrol or even other units. Once you work a sexual assault unit for any amount of time, and especially over 1,300 cases, you get that hard shell gets even harder.
Yeah, I feel for cops in your position, just like in other units where you say, we want the balance with our law enforcement responders, especially in detectives, to not be so much that we don't care anymore, that we go, well, whatever happened to them, so what, it's not my family. And then the other end of the spectrum is we care too much. So there's a concept in law enforcement, which is, a psychological issue of countertransference, which is, I lose focus, I lose perspective, I care too much, and I become too involved in these people's lives and cases. And then the other side, which is a lot of cops go to, which is they stop caring. They go, well, whatever, I'm just going to do my time and go home. And so I think, your to your benefit is that you really had that balance of caring about these people and what happened to them, but not losing your perspective.
Yeah, sure, and that's an easy thing to do when somebody comes to you, no matter what age, and a horrific thing has happened to them, and they're, telling you their deepest, darkest secrets, and you're able to make that, that connection with them. There was times I wanted to leave, obviously. I mean, I would come home and, tell my wife, as you know, he's a prosecutor, so she would understand, but I'd come home and I'm just like, I'm done, and then I would go back in and I would just look at my, into the faces and into the eyes of my victims. And I thought, okay, I'm going to work this one last case,
Right.
And after I finish these other 10, I'm out of here. And then you would get new ones. And that balance, is there, and it's tough, but it's a swing, it's hard to stay, even keeled. You are going to bounce around, and depending on the cases that you do get.
When you look at sex crimes investigators from a male-female perspective, it must be more of a challenge to be a male investigator, male detective dealing with women for these issues. The privacy, the humiliation, the embarrassment. Like you said, it's their it's the worst day of their life. And as a male, you have a different perspective of how you see sexuality than women do, obviously. And so you've really got to know how to handle victims from a standpoint of compassion. And I've seen, you and I have seen male sex crimes detectives that treat everybody sort of like, kind of a robotic way. So the female investigators have a little bit more advantage there. So talk to me about what you tried to do to build that empathy and to build trust for that person who had experienced something that men and women don't typically talk about in polite society.
Yeah, so I was able to, I look at it this way. I mean, depending on the age of my victim, if she was a teenager or early 20s, I could pull off the father figure. And if they were closer to age than me, I could pull off the big brother figure. Out of over 1,300 cases, I only had one female victim that requested a female detective, and you would think there would be more, but maybe it was just because of the way I would speak with them. Because it is a walking that tightrope of this person looking at you, knowing that there's a 98% chance that the suspect was a male,
right?
And I may look like that person. So I was really strong pro advocate is I worked really close with our advocates, and for any investigator, listening to this podcast, I would, employ you to go out and really reach out to your advocates, because they also have a tough job. But I always made sure that advocate was there. And once that advocate knew that the type of investigator I was, they would really talk to the victims and let them know who I am and how I work. So it wasn't too much of a problem for me, but there were a lot of, not a lot, but some male investigators that had a tough time with that.
Yeah, you look at kind of an unsung hero from your work is the sexual assault nurses that do the sexual assault forensics exams. I mean, that has to be, you're talking about, having to take, sperm samples from, vaginal cavities, anal cavities, mouth. You're looking at having to do, a forensic medical exam on this victim. It's it's necessary, as you know, for the DNA piece of it. And we'll talk about CODIS and things like that in a bit. But just how that job, you have to have the right kind of personality as a nurse to be that kind of do that kind of forensic work.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they obviously they're seeing the victim, soon after, sometimes immediately after, but soon after their assault, at least within 5 days of that. And here they're dealing with, a patient, if you will. Their job is to collect evidence, and they have a hard shell too. Sometimes it's tough to keep a perspective on what you're doing. These, young survivors would come in and, they're very emotional. Now this person who wants to, to collect evidence, but also want to help, has to poke and prod. And, a lot of times, because I do speak and I do instruct and I do teach, I would often talk to my victims way after everything is done through the, judicial system, and just ask them, what did I do wrong? What did I do right? And how do they solve the process? And one of them was, the sexual assault nurse examiner, they were like, well, they were really nice. However, I had to go through this exam, and there's just really no way around it. And I got to say, these Shane nurses, and I know a lot of them, because the conferences I go to, and I used to work with them, they're really, really good at their job, and they are compassionate. And again, having that advocate present is just so important.
Yeah, I think what people don't realize too is the sexual assault nurse examiners have to do the forensic exam against the suspects you bring in. There's the examination of the suspect head to toe to get the evidence off of this guy to match, and that's a whole other challenge as well, dealing with the perpetrator. I guess, Carl, the biggest thing that I think people don't understand about the work that you have done is what you and I would call the CSI effect, which is every rape kit must be tested, because every rape kit has enough DNA in it from the semen to be able to identify the guy 5 minutes after we test the kit, like we see on TV. So talk about sort of the challenges of the CSI effect, and also explain what CODIS is.
Yeah, sure. So the CSI effect, it's a lot of times it hurts cases because you just don't have forensics in every case. Most sexual assaults are done what we call a rape by intoxication, and where you have usually a young female or a female is rendered unconscious or in a blackout situation, and is sexually assaulted. They're not going to come forward till anywhere from 5 to 10 days later after the assault, and there's to report, and there's just not going to be any forensic. And you walk into a courtroom with a prosecutor, and they want to see forensics. Okay, they want to see the DNA. They want to be able to say, this person sexually assaulted this person, and this is how it did it, and here's the forensics of it.
And the juries want to see that as well.
Well, yeah, obviously you go into court with evidence, but a lot of sexual assaults don't have that forensic component to it, and it comes down to testimonial and who's going to believe, which side. And, it just doesn't happen like you said on television. After the first commercial, the police are involved. The second commercial break, you're chasing down some guy, and then the last commercial break you're in court. It just doesn't work that way. And in a lot of cases, sometimes they take years, especially if you identify someone and they flee. And this may not go to court until he's caught, and he's apprehended and brought back. It could be years down the road.
So
as far as
define CODIS for us.
Yeah, so CODIS is a DNA. It's a combined index. It's a national data bank. So you say you have a case, you have a person that's not identified, but you do have a DNA profile of that suspect. So how it works in California, and most states do the same thing. They have a local data bank, so they'll check that first. So they'll put the DNA profile, upload it into that local data bank. Then if that's not doesn't get a match, they'll go into the state data bank, and then they'll go into CODIS, which is the national data bank, to see if there's a match. When I got into the sex crimes unit in 2000 or 1999 or around there. Those data banks weren't as as full as they are now with profiles. We still had the majority of the prisoners were not even we didn't have a profile. They had never been swabbed, and their profile was uploaded. Now that was 20 years ago. So now the data banks are pretty rich. But as you know how cops and crooks work, we have a tool that is great, and then they figure out how to get around that. So they try their earnest not to leave their DNA profile.
So the issue that we have across the country that you have seen, and it's on the news, occasionally, is the untested rape kit discussion, which is somehow it seems, to police departments. You look at, Detroit or, New York City or places where there's a backlog, and in California, certain agencies, that somehow we're not being supportive of victims, that we don't care. But talk about the untested rape kit piece. From my perspective, it's a couple things. One, it's the rape kit itself may not have enough DNA to get a CODIS hit, and the other piece is it's expensive to test, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of these cases across the country, and so they have to come up with funding, and then there's just a backlog in the labs. That just the process of doing it is the third issue, right?
Yeah, there's several issues, and in the perfect world, we would test them all. I mean, as an investigator, you'd want that. First of all, not all rape kits have DNA. There's just not. And if it's a partial profile, those could be uploaded, but then you get this very low number of possible suspects. But getting back to the reasons why a lot of kits are not processed is because the suspect's already identified. You have somebody and you said, oh yeah, I had consensual sex with this person. It wasn't a sexual assault. So therefore you don't have to, process that kit. The other could be that she recanted, or there was some reason why the investigation was stopped. So there's another reason why they're not processed. You also have tempora or time. There's an older rape kit, and this is the unfortunate part of this. There's a rape kit from 15 years ago, and even if you was to process that and identified somebody now, that's not going to go forward. Maybe if they already been adjudicated, a person says, okay, I plead guilty. So there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, it's unfortunate that money has to play a part. And a lot of people that's not in the criminal justice system don't understand the money portion of this thing. Because if money was not a problem, we would have 1,000 investigators,
Right.
So, but you have, highly trained people working in the lab, but you have to pay those people. That stuff costs money, the materials and such. I feel that when I'm asked about this issue, I would like to see all rape kits, if they have DNA, is just take the swabs and process those. Not the sheets, not the clothes, not the underwear or anything like that. That way you cut down the money portion of it, the time portion of it, and at least have those vagina swabs or rectal swabs, whatever it may be. And if they do have a DNA profile, whether this is going to court or not, is to upload it. I would love it to go straight to CODIS, because I've had cases where I was shocked, where DNA has actually proven a person not to be guilty, and others I thought was pretty sure they were innocent, and they weren't. So, at least test the swabs.
We're talking to Carl Hershman, who retired after 32 years with the San Diego Police Department. Detective Hershman is a nationally recognized speaker and trainer in sexual assault investigations. So, Carl, let's sing our praises from RPD and also in California. It's hard these days to find good things to talk about in California. What do you think we do well in San Diego PD for sex crimes investigations? What do we do well in California that other states, and you go around the country talking about this, what are they learning from us in our approach?
Well, I mean, I'm doing a webinar tomorrow, and we'll talk about that a little later. 85% of my caseload was drunk by intoxication. And the problem is with those cases is that a lot of investigators do not know how to investigate those. And if they do, it's not a detailed, accurate investigation. So when they do send it over, it doesn't get issued. I think in California, under that statute, which is the 261A3 and A4 statute of the Penal Code, stating that you can't have sex with somebody that is severely intoxicated. I know our unit, at least I have been out of that unit for a while, but when we were there, we took those cases very seriously. Not just because they were not looked at in other agencies. It was just that it was a crime that occurred. I mean, this is a person, whether you were severely intoxicated or not, was sexually assaulted. And we really concentrated on those cases. And that's kind of where I kind of got my teaching moment with other agencies, and we began to teach about it, was to vigorously investigate those and have a good working relationship with the DA's office. And I think in San Diego, that's what was really kind of, we stood out. And I knew every single one of our DAs that worked the sex crimes unit. We would sit down and I would hand carry my cases over, which I was taught a long time ago. Just don't send them over. So that team atmosphere is what I think California does a very good job at. Now, I mean, obviously there's some cases that, that's not done with, but for a large agency in a large city like San Diego, we had that sexual assault response team attitude where when I got a case in the morning, it wasn't just me. It was my advocate. It was the SART nurse. It was other detectives in the unit. It was the DA. And then, we worked very well with the, social workers and the mental health providers. So I think it was the team atmosphere, which I don't think happens across. I speak across the nation, and I hear this, kind of headbutting with this agency or headbutting with this, with the nurses or whatever, and it's just, it's just not going to work well. But in California, I think we did a great job.
So I've been doing some webinars for Los Angeles City on mandated reporters. So mandated reporter for elder abuse, mandated reporter for developmental adult abuse, and for child abuse. And so, it sort of leads to a parallel that, you have seen in your work, which is many times when it comes to sexual assault with an adult or a child, there's sort of this mindset that it must be a stranger. So we teach, stranger danger to kids, and we have this sense of, being concerned about the creepy guy in the van that comes by and snatches the kid off the street. And when you look at sexual assaults, I mean, it's mostly from people that the victim knows. It's a relative, it's an ex-boyfriend or something like that. So talk about kind of the victim or the suspect sort of profile from the standpoint of the stranger rape, the guy on the street that grabs this person. It happens, but it's much more likely to be someone that has some sort of connection through school or work or an acquaintance or relative. Talk about that kind of connection with the suspects.
Yeah, I mean, look, 98% of the time, the victim's going to know